And Bob Woodward is with us now on the eve of Rage's release for an exclusive live interview. Bob, good morning. And let's pick it up right there, because the biggest revelation by far from this book is that the president told you way back on February 7th that this coronavirus was airborne, that it was 5 times more deadly than the flu. As you well know, you've been criticized for not releasing that information until now. The president has criticized you. Other commentators, one said on Twitter, nearly 200,000 Americans have died because neither Donald Trump nor Bob Woodward wanted to risk anything substantial to keep the country informed. So I'll give you a chance to answer. Why didn't you publish this information until now?
Because in February, I thought it was all about China, because the president had told me about a discussion with Chinese President Xi. And if you look at what was known in February, the virus was not on anyone's mind. No one was suggesting changing behavior. Then when it exploded in March, as you know, there were 30,000 new cases a day. Publishing something at that point would not have been telling people anything they didn't know. They knew very clearly that it was dangerous.
Well, let me just pick up on that, because, you know, understanding that hindsight is 20/20 vision, and it may have taken some time to put all the pieces together. One thing was abundantly clear. He tells you on February 7th, this is 5 times worse than the flu. It's deadly and it's airborne. And in the weeks following, he was saying things like, this is just a flu. It will just disappear. So you knew right then and there was a contradiction between the public statement and what he had told you. Why not publish it right then and there and let the chips fall?
If there was any suggestion I had that that was about the United States, I would have, of course, published. I think I have a public health, public safety responsibility. But there was no indication in February. In March, everyone knew what Trump had told me, that it applied to the United States. The key here, Savannah, is that in May, 3 months later, I learned the key piece of evidence that on January 28th, 10 days before that February call, the president was warned by his national security advisor in a top secret meeting that the virus is going to be the greatest national security threat to your presidency. And then his deputy, Matt Pottinger, stepped up with details explaining that a pandemic was coming. So that's why I begin the book with that January 28th meeting, because that's what the president is telling me about on February 7th. Well, I think he's talking about China.
Well, okay, let's talk about some of those early meetings, because the book takes readers inside. You mentioned the January 28th warning about the national security threat. 3 days later, January 31st, the China travel ban goes into effect. Now, the president over these last few months has said over and over again that it was his idea to ban travel from China and that no one agreed with him. He says almost everybody was just absolutely against it. My experts, I didn't listen to my experts. I banned China. Your book contains the first meeting that happened with Fauci, Dr. Redfield of the CDC, Alexander Azar of HHS, coming to the president and saying, you should ban travel from China. And he says, okay. So it's different than what apparently the president has been telling of this story.
Not apparently. It is very different, and it's essential to the understanding. It's not that President Trump banned travel, people coming from China to the United States. He restricted it, and as we now know, there were some problems, and lots of people from China, instead of coming to the United States, went to Europe and then came into John F. Kennedy Airport in New York, and that's why there was such a firestorm of virus in New York City at that time.
Yeah, but just to put a fine point on it, your book, Your book shows that it wasn't the president up against the world, but that his advisors actually said, you should do this. And he said, okay.
Yes, absolutely. And look, when I learned in May about the January 28th meeting and the specificity, the National Security Advisor and his deputy were giving details to the president about why this is a coming pandemic to the United States. A few days later, he gave his State of the Union address to Congress. 40 million people watched it. He had an opportunity. He's very he said, well, we're doing everything possible. At that moment, if, like Franklin Roosevelt after Pearl Harbor, had told the American people the truth, a lot more could have been done. It is one of those shocks for me, having written about 9 presidents, that the President of the United States possessed the specific knowledge that could have saved lives. Historians are going to be writing about the lost month of February for tens of years.
Bob, the book covers a lot of territory, foreign policy being one of them, and you have given us a piece of one of your 9 hours of interviews with the president in which he talks about his relationships with some of these autocratic leaders like Turkey's Erdogan, Kim Jong-Un, Putin. Let me play it for our viewers right now, and we'll talk about it the other side.
That I get along very well with Erdogan, even though you're not supposed to, because everyone says what a horrible guy. But for me, it works out good. It's funny that the relationships I have, the tougher and meaner they are, the better I get along with them. You'll explain that to me someday, okay? But maybe it's not a bad thing. The easy ones are the ones I maybe don't like as much or don't get along with as much.
How did that strike you when you heard it, Bob? And I should mention that your book also reports that Dan Coats, the former director of national intelligence, Republican senator of Indiana, you report came to believe that Putin had something on President Trump and suspected the worst.
Yes, but Dan Coats, who was the #1 intelligence officer in the country, did not have proof. They went through all the intelligence, but he indeed harbored that suspicion. But the tape you play about the president saying, look, I get along with all these bad people, I don't get along with the good ones. As you know, under the Constitution, the president controls foreign relations unilaterally. He decides, and he has decided, oh, I'm going to get along with Putin. I'm going to get along with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, MBS. And I'm going to try to get along with Kim Jong-Un, the leader of North Korea, but not South Korea. And he just smears South Korea time and time again in my interviews. He is the face of the United States to the world.
Bob.
And he has said, and there it is, hey, look, I get along with these bad guys, but not the good guys.
I'm almost out of time, but there's so much to talk about with this book. The president gave you 18 interviews in all. You have some 9 hours of recording. Very quickly before we go, what was your overall impression of his demeanor and his focus? And are you surprised he gave you that much time? I know one of the calls he said, I've got the Joint Chiefs waiting for me downstairs, and then he talked for 15 more minutes, according to you.
Well, according to the tape recording, he decided he was going to do it. He didn't like my first book, Fear. He regretted not talking to me, and he opened himself up, and there will be audio showing how he liked my questions. We spent all that time together exploring the inner Donald Trump, his motivations, his actions, how he assessed the world. What really struck me is I listened to some of these tapes and audios is the microphone is also a microscope, that you see things when you hear it. There is a tone, there is an exuberance, there is an alarm, and I love writing books and newspaper articles and the work I have done, but those audios are this it's not just a microscope, it's really a magnifying
Well, reporter
glass.
to reporter, Bob, you've given me a final follow-up. It's got to be a quickie. Are you going to release all those audio tapes?
Well, I'm releasing the ones that are relevant as people ask for them. It's quite an archive.
Okay. Bob Woodward, the book is called Rage. Thank you for your time this morning, your first live exclusive interview. It's much appreciated.